Alright guys, welcome back to another Dark Souls 3 Soul Level 125 PvP build, and today we are finally taking a look at that really overpowered strength build, originally crafted by Astrablade, one of the people that we play with on the stream. Both he invades and does co-op. Very good PvPer, and this build is obviously his creation. He shared it with us on stream, and I went ahead and I made the build. I've uploaded two separate videos going into the arena with this build, where we absolutely just decimated everything. So full disclosure, as with every other normal build video that we do, there won't be any direct PvP in this video. If you do want to see the actual PvP matches, you can check the link in the description. Anyways, let's go ahead and get started taking a look at the build. So this is going to be kind of the starting point for me. You can customize this how you want, but essentially this is the basic breakdown. Your vigor and endurance are going to be at around 35 points each, simply because you're going to use the prisoner's chain, which is going to bump up your vigor and your endurance to 40. That's going to be around the soft caps for those two stats, as with every other build mostly. Our vitality is actually pumped all the way up to 30, which will also go to 35 thanks to the prisoner's chain, and that will allow us to equip very heavy armor and utilize some very good defense and poise stats, so we can just tank through virtually everything that our opponent throws at us. Our strength, this is where we get the bulk of our damage from, is at 62. So you can see here the way that the build kind of comes together, or where it really focuses on, is the vitality and the strength attributes. Because the vitality is where you get your defense and your poise, the strength is where you get your massive amounts of damage from. And of course the weapon setup does matter, but we'll discuss that a little bit later. Our dexterity is at the base of 12, our intelligence at the base of 9, same with our luck at the base of 7. Our faith we pumped 1 extra point into to bring it up to 10, because our attunement is also at 14, so that we can utilize Tears of Denial. For those of you that don't know the trick, you equip your Priestess Ring so that you get an extra +5 faith, you cast your Tears of Denial, and then you switch out your Priestess Ring to something else, and you're good to go. So that's basically how the build breaks down. It is Soul Level 125, and there are a few different things that we utilize to boost our stats up. So what I like to use personally, in my opinion, these are the staples, is the Ring of Favor +3, the Prisoner's Chain. As you can see there on the right hand side of the screen, the stats go from 35, 35, and 30 respectively for vigor, endurance, and vitality, up to 40, 40, and 35. So that pumps up our stats just a little bit more, an extra 15 levels. Now, you don't necessarily need the stamina ring, but I personally always like to use it. You could use something else. And then this fourth ring slot, or the final ring slot, this is your dynamic ring slot. This is where you'll probably start off with the Priestess Ring to have the 15 faith, and you can switch it out to whatever you want. If you're going really heavy on the armor and the poise, you can go with the Havel's Ring +3. You can go with the Lloyd Shield Ring. It's totally up to you. Depends on whatever kind of setup you want to use. Usually I'd probably go with the Havel's Ring, just so we can just have that extra bit of armor and that extra bit of poise, so to make sure that we virtually always come out with our attacks. So with a setup like this, you can see up in the top right hand corner, our equip load is now 96.4, very high. So with that being said, what kind of armor do you want to use? While it will depend upon the actual weapons that you decide to end up using, most of the time I'm going to use the Black Iron Leggings, the Gundyr's Gauntlets. I personally like the Milkwood Knight Armor. Not Milk, Millwood Knight Armor. Sorry, my character's name is Milky, I think. That's why I was saying that. Yeah. Anyways, you could use the Gundyr's Armor, which does technically have more poise and I think a little bit better defense, but it does weigh, I think, around 1.8 units more. Totally up to you though. I just like the way that this one looks, so I opted with this. The poise you can see already at 35 on the stat screen, so you know it's not really going to make too much of a difference. And then finally I use the Black Iron Helm, so it puts us up almost at 40 poise, which is absolutely ridiculous. And then the weapon of choice usually will be something like the Heavy Greatsword or the Heavy Great Club. If you've seen our streams, you've seen Astra most likely use the Heavy Great Club, and to very devastating effect. I've used the Heavy Greatsword a lot throughout the arena and been very successful with it. I think to this day I've only lost about 5 matches or so with it. Just playing random arena matches, so it's really good. And if you don't believe me, again, just check out those PvP videos linked in the description, and you'll see. Offhand weapon, as usual, the Blessed Fist weapon for the HP regeneration, and your Chime of choice or Talisman of choice is totally up to you, but I prefer the Saintry Belvine. Thanks to Astra for mentioning this to me. Even though you don't have the stat requirements to wield this, You don't need it for Tears of Denial. We'll still be able to cast our Tears, no problem, because it's only the spell buff that's being nerfed with the Saintry Bellvine, not the actual ability to cast the Miracle. So you still get that virtual dexterity increase, which does make a difference at the start of an arena match. You can cast your Tears faster, switch out your equipment faster, and get ready for your opponents rushing you down to combat that. Now, on the stat screen, if you look at the weight ratio, you're going to see that we're only at 65.3. And that is some space wasted. You can technically equip heavier armor, get a little bit extra poise if you wanted to. But what I like to do with this setup is I like to equip like a finisher weapon in the offhand. So I go with the Heavy Spear plus 10, which does have around 379 base AR for physical damage. And you can see that we go up to 69.9, just below the 70% threshold when we use the Havel's Ring. And a setup like this, if anybody's used heavy weapons before, if you get your first 2 hits in or 3 hits in and your opponent's on like a sliver of HP, they become very, very defensive and they don't take nearly as many risks as they do in the beginning of a match. And it's going to be a little bit harder to hit them with a somewhat slow-moving greatsword. And the way to combat that is to just have a finisher weapon in your offhand. A spear is very good. It's quick. It has a good amount of reach, and it can chase down opponents pretty effectively. So this is like my finisher weapon. You can also use like a long sword if you wanted to, or another small weapon, totally up to you. And you don't really necessarily need this. You could technically just get rid of it and use heavier armor. But if you're kind of in that situation where you find, man, why is it so annoying to chase down opponents? And because your arena mode is timed, you can't spend all day chasing somebody down, having that finisher weapon could help. Now, of course, it's going to be different based upon what weapons you want to use. So if I was using the Great Hammer here, I'd need to use maybe lighter armor, just to be able to utilize that weapon. So it would depend. You just got to mix it up based on the weapons you want to use. But you do have a decent amount of weapons at your disposal, mainly heavy weapons, the Great Hammer, the Great Sword, and the Great Club. These are, your 3 classes of ultra weapons essentially, even though 2 of them are hammers. The Great Axes, they're not really my cup of tea, but if you really wanted to use them, you can as well, obviously. And you do have a decent access to smaller weapons as well. The Heavy Mace is probably one of the better weapons in the game just because of the Perseverance skill and it being a quick weapon. It can contest a lot, if not everything, thanks to Perseverance. So it's a very overlooked build, the Strength build. As you guys have seen on stream, if you've watched it, you've seen how effective it could be. But if you haven't tried it already, definitely give it a try. It's one of the most powerful builds I think I've ever tried in the game. And it's just so effective. And while you may think, how, are you really going to hit somebody with an ultra weapon? And again, it's mainly just, you can poke away at your opponent all you want, or the opponent can poke away at you. But because you have such high defense, if they're using like a smaller weapon, they're going to need 6 to 10 hits to kill you. They can poke away at you here or there, and all it takes is one good prediction from you, one good connect, one good roll catch, anything like that, and you're going to deal a massive amount of damage to your opponent. You can see here we do 619 while one-handed, 663 while two-handed on this weapon. You can buff it or infuse it it's infused with heavy, but you can buff it with a resin or blessed weapon if you want to go that route as well to get an extra decent amount of physical damage on it. But overall, I mean, this setup is very, very good. And one of the things I never really liked about this game when it first came out was these swords with the vertical swing down, these ultra great swords. They weren't really that good in my opinion, but since the patches have come through with From Software, they've really improved the class of ultra great sword weapons because they've made them quicker. And this vertical swing is now so fast, it's honestly almost hard to react to sometimes, especially when you can mix up with a decent R2. And the reason that I like this sword over the Black Knight sword, despite that this one having more damage for a pure strength build, the Black Knight sword is more so for quality builds. But the R2 on this one is actually way better than any other ultra great sword in my opinion. If not, well, I can't say that per se, but it's up there with the R2 thrust for sure. Just because the arc of the R2 charge, the charged R2, it can catch a lot of rolls. It has some decent forward momentum and just the reach of the weapon. If your opponent is anywhere around you, they're going to get caught by that. Whereas the thrust forward, the charged R2 thrust forward from other ultra weapons, it can sometimes only hit vertically, or sorry, not vertically, directly in front of you. So you may miss an opponent rolling behind you or rolling to the side of you. But with a weapon like this, you can see that you can control the arc very, very effectively to cover a much wider range. And while, yes, you can technically still do that with the R2, it still only hits in one forward direction, whereas this has like an arc sweep. So it can catch, or it covers a lot more range, and it can catch a lot more horizontal movement from your opponent. And you see that if you watch those PvP matches, just how effective that R2 can be, mixing it up with your R1. Very, very effective. Not to mention the fact that the stamina consumption doesn't seem as much as you might think. So your opponent may think that they can come in and punish you, and if they do, and you connect with one of those R2 or R1 combos, you know, you're dealing a massive amount of damage. That also being said, what's also very unique about the Great Sword, despite it being badass coming from the Berserk anime, because it looks like Guts' sword, but this is one of the only weapons where the follow-up R1 can actually be used to combo into a regular R1. So if you miss with the first R1, you follow up with a follow-up R1, you hit the opponent. If you mash out an R1 to do another vertical downward swing, you will connect the second R1 into the first R1. And it's one of the only weapons that can do that in the game, which makes it very, very effective at dishing out massive amounts of combo damage. So that's pretty much the build. There's a lot to utilize with the Great Hammer as well. The two-handed R2. Oh, no, you definitely don't want to use the weapon art with this weapon. Full disclosure. You just want to use the regular R2. It has an insane amount of forward momentum and an insane hitbox that can roll catch and do a lot of different things. It's very, very effective. Not to mention that the R2 from this weapon combos into the R1. You can see how quickly you can combo from the R2 into the R1. So there's a lot of unique mix-ups and different play styles and different spacing tactics that you can really use with this strength build to make it very, very effective. But overall, guys, that is the video. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Again, check out those PvP videos if you want to see the build in action. Make sure you subscribe so you can catch our live stream. You can catch Astra, the creator of this build, using this, and he's very, very effective with it. I'm not going to lie. You can catch our fight clubs usually on Sunday nights. But drop a like on the video if you liked it. Thank you again for watching. Quantum is out.